Yo, welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. You want to hear a secret? I've got 10 amazing facts that most beginning woodworkers have no idea about. Let's check out these 10 facts and see if they can help you out. Welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. We've all heard the phrase that secrets keep us sick. However, for woodworking, secrets prevent us from furthering our skills. This whole craft is based on the premise of handing down knowledge from one generation to the next. And that's why this video is going to take a look at some of these myths and help beginning woodworkers understand what they need to know to start woodworking as soon as possible. So when you first start woodworking, you may be confused as to what tools you should buy first. This can become especially confusing once you make a trip to the big box store. Now there's a lot of brand loyalty in woodworking. A lot of this has to do with what battery infrastructure you first get into. There's every different color of tools in the rainbow. There's green tools, there's orange tools, there's blue tools, there's red tools, and there's yellow tools. And these are just a few of the tools that you may be looking at. As we walk down the aisle of a local Home Depot, you can see that there's a variety of different brands of tools. And this can be really confusing for the beginning woodworker, is which tool brand should I get into? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Should we get into something like a Ryobi, or something like a Milwaukee, or even something like a DeWalt? Not only do big box stores have tools, but there's also higher end shops like Woodcraft and Rockler that carry brands like Festool as well as Bosch. So what do you buy? That's the big question, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's take a look at 3 drills that I have in my shop. I've got a Ryobi drill, a DeWalt drill, as well as a Festool drill. Now Ryobi is considered an entry-level brand, and DeWalt is an intermediate to advanced brand, and Festool is more of a professional brand. So you may be asking, which brand do you recommend? In my opinion, may not be the most popular one, as I really don't think that there's much difference between any of these 3 drills for the beginning woodworker. Now, if I were building a project today, I'm going to reach for my Festool. That's because it has some incremental features that I may or may not need on a project. Plus, I paid an arm and a leg for it. But if it's in your budget, you may want to go with something like a DeWalt. And the only reason I say this is because once you purchase the tool, you tend to stay with that tool. And that's because you're usually locked into a battery infrastructure. For me, I was locked into the Ryobi infrastructure, and that's the tool that I purchased today. However, if I would have started with something like a DeWalt, I may not have moved to a Festool as soon. And that's my advice for the beginning woodworker. There really isn't that much variance from one brand to the other. The important thing is that you buy something that's in your budget and you get out in your shop and you start making some stuff. Well, that covers our first tip today. Now let's move on to our second tip. Our second tip has everything to do with how to start off a project. So what if I were to tell you that every project you make doesn't start off in your shop? It actually starts at the lumber store. Let's take a trip to Home Depot and talk about it. So if you're anything like me, most of your first projects will start off with lumber like 2x4s. And if we take a look at this 2x4 right here, you can see the huge bow. And defects like bows and twists were things that I never considered when I first started woodworking. I would just grab the wood that was on top, put it in my cart, and head out the door. Now a lot of lumber that's at these big box stores is susceptible to these defects. And that's because of one of 2 reasons. Either A, the big box store received the wood and they stored it outside. Therefore, the wood was exposed to all the elements of the weather. The second reason could be is that they received the wood and it wasn't fully dried or cured yet. And that's why it's extremely important to take your time when picking out your lumber. Take all the wood that's on top of the pile and push it to the side. Typically, this wood has already been rejected by someone for some reason or another. Then pull out a board and look down both sides to make sure that there's no twists or curves in the wood. This little tip is also important for things like hardwoods. Get to the very back of the pile and find the perfect board. I mean, just look at some of this wood I found at Home Depot. There's some real bananas in here. Lastly, if you have the ability, bring the wood home to your shop and let it sit for a week or 2. This will allow the wood to acclimate to your shop and further dry out. Since we're talking about wood selection, we're now going to move on to our third tip. And this is something that I learned from Steve Ramsey when I first started woodworking. So one of the things that I love about woodworking is you can create a piece that has a lot of character. Now a lot of character comes from the design you create, but a lot of it comes from the wood you select too. And some features like knots that may be undesirable for some woodworkers can really make your project unique. Maybe you find a piece of cedar that's got a bunch of knots and you really like the way that looks, so this might be the perfect wood for you. Or you find a piece of pine that's got some nice wood grain and you'd really like to incorporate it in your project. Here's another piece of pine with a bunch of little knot holes, and this may be the perfect board for you. So pick wood that's got interesting character that you really like. If it's pleasing to your eye, it's going to be pleasing to others' eyes as well. Just make sure that that wood is completely flat and straight. Well, I hope those last two wood selection tips are helpful for the beginning woodworker and give them just a little bit more confidence to go into a lumber store and pick the right wood for them. Now let's move on to our fourth tip. So our next two tips relate to the saw blade, and these are two tips that can really take your woodworking game to the next level, especially with precision and accuracy. So one thing I never gave a whole lot of consideration to when I first started woodworking is that saw blades have some thickness to them. And you can see from my calipers right here, this saw blade is 1/8 of an inch thick. Now not every saw blade is 1/8 of an inch thick. In fact, I've got this Diablo fine finish blade that's actually a 1/16 of an inch thick. So you need to be very cognizant of what blade you have in your table saw. Now I once again made a trip to Home Depot and took a look at the blades that they have here. And as you can see, there are so many blades that this can become really confusing for the beginning woodworker. If you're looking for a standard table saw blade, you really can't go wrong with a general purpose 10-inch blade that's got an 1/8 inch thickness. It's the thickness of the blade that's actually called a queef. Actually, it's called a kerf. And it's this kerf that we really need to be paying attention to when we're making our cuts. So let's say on our workpiece we've struck a line and we want to make a cut. Now if we were to cut right down the center of that line, it would take 1/8 of an inch off our workpiece. And if we wanted to keep that line along with this area right here, we need to make sure that we're accounting for that kerf in the cut. So in this example, if we wanted to keep this area of the workpiece along with our line, we'd need to run our blade on the opposite side of this line, making sure that the blade does not come in contact with that line. So in this example, if we want to keep this side and waste this side and keep the line itself, we don't want to line our workpiece so the line is actually where the blade hits, but we actually want to move it over a bit so that the line is actually on one side of the blade. So determining where your blade needs to be in relation to your cut lines is critically important. You can always nibble away a little bit more wood, but you can never add it back. So now that we've talked about kerfs and where to place our blade on our cut lines, let's move on to our next saw blade tip. So the table saw can be one of the most dangerous tools in our shop if we're not using it safely. And these two little tips can help you to use that table saw just a little bit more safely. So when I first started woodworking, I would raise my table saw blade up as high as it would go. That way I would never have to adjust it and I could cut through lumber as thick as I wanted. With it raised up like this, I was ready to rip. Woo! Now because I was a dumbass, I went ahead and got myself a saw stop. However, most people don't have saw stops. Let's talk about how high we should be raising our blade. So in order to reduce our exposure to injury, we always want to make sure that we have as little of the blade exposed as possible. We want to lower the blade so it just cuts through our workpiece. By having that blade raised about 1/2 inch above your workpiece, it drastically reduces the risk of you getting something caught in that blade, like your finger. But there's something just as important as having your blade at the right height. Now we've all heard of kickback. Now if we take a look at these videos right here, you can see some drastic examples of some kickback. Now these kickbacks could have resulted in some really serious injuries. Now there's one thing that can prevent kickback that's more important than any other tool, and that's the riving knife. Let's talk about the riving knife and what kickback is. So no, there isn't a shark underneath your table saw. This piece right here is the riving knife, and this single-handedly is the most important tool on your table saw to prevent kickback. So wood is a material that can have a lot of tension in it. A lot of times as you cut through wood, that tension can be released and the wood can bend one way or another. And it's this tension that can oftentimes create kickback. Now here you can see I've removed my riving knife, and you can see from these two arrows here, this piece of wood may have some built-up tension in the back of it. Now once this tension is released by cutting through it, these two pieces could pinch together and it could get caught on one of the sawtooths. Once it's caught on one of the sawtooths, this wood can directly go backwards and hit you very quickly. And that's really what a riving knife does. It acts as a wedge to keep the tension separated and allows the blade to freely move and not get caught up on your wood. So this may be the most important thing you learned today, and that's to keep your riving knife in place on your table saw. Now I go over YouTube and I see a lot of woodworkers not using a riving knife, and this is really dangerous for the beginning woodworker. You especially see this on a lot of foreign woodworking channels, and you even see it on some channels from here in America. And I don't care how experienced you are in woodworking, working without a riving knife is just a risk that I don't want to take. All right, well that covers 5 woodworking tips for the beginner so far. Before we move on, I ask you to do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and leave a like, as it really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, for any of the tools that you see in this video, I'll leave links in the description below so you can go check out those tools for yourself. Now let's move on to our 6th item. So if somebody told you that a pencil could affect the way your final project came out, would you believe them? Well, it's true. Let's go take a closer look. So a pencil's a pencil, right? Well, that's what I used to think too. I used to go to the big box store and purchase these carpentry pencils by the bulk. But woodworking's all about precision and accuracy. An 1/8 of an inch, a 1/16 of an inch, and even a 32nd of an inch can really make a difference in a project. So here I've scribed a line with 6 different scribing tools. I started with a Sharpie, then a carpentry pencil, then a Fat Boy, then a 7mm pencil, a 5mm pencil, and then a scribing tool. And you can see there's some real differences between each one of these scribing tools. Now for me, a Sharpie, a carpentry pencil, and the Fat Boy are only used when I'm rough cutting lumber to get it to its appropriate length. And the last 3 are really the only marking tools that I use when I'm doing my final woodworking. Now a 0.7mm lead is great because it leaves a nice line and the lead doesn't break that often. The 0.5mm is great because it leaves a crisp, clean line. Lastly, my favorite is the marking knife. So just like your saw blade has a queef that you need to account for, your marking tools also have some width to them as well. So you need to pick the right marking tool for the right job. So since we're talking about marking and measuring, let's move on to our next tip. Now our next tip has everything to do with how you need to cut out your workpieces before you assemble them. So one thing that I'm always leery of is cut lists. Now cut lists are designed to help you figure out how much lumber you need at the lumber store, and then you take it home and you can make your cuts. Now there's a lot of people that think you can bring all your lumber home, measure out everything, and make all your cuts at once before you assemble anything. And this is where there can be an issue. A lot of times when you're milling up your lumber or you're cutting your lumber to length, it may not be exactly what you think it is, or there may be a subtle variation in the lumber that creates a little bit of a gap. So if you're a beginning woodworker and you're using plans, first off, bravo, because most beginning woodworkers aren't using plans. But secondly, once you hit that cut list, don't make all your cuts right in the beginning. And there's a simple reason for this. When you're building a project, a lot of times your alignments aren't perfect. Therefore, when you go to assemble your final project, there may be small variations in your project. So instead of cutting everything down in the beginning, let's actually use the workpiece as a reference guide to making our final cuts. So let's use this butcher block as an example. Now I used this in a previous video to show what a board foot is. Now this is supposed to be 12 inches wide by 12 inches thick. But if I put my tape measure down on this board, it's actually 12 1/16 of an inch thick. And that's fine that this workpiece is actually 12 1/16 of an inch. We just need to know that we need to reference this workpiece versus a tape measure. And that's my tip to you. A lot of times you need to reference your project or use something like a story stick instead of using a tape measure, as there's nothing more precise than the workpiece you're working on. So now that we've talked about measuring for a bit, let's move on to something that really irks me. So what is woodworking? Is woodworking using something like this Shaper Origin, which is a handheld CNC machine? Or is this woodworking? Me pretending to lay out some dovetails on this piece of walnut. Is this woodworking? Me building a new deck for our house? Well, in my opinion, every single one of those tasks is woodworking. There's no difference between a carpenter and a woodworker. There's a lot of stigma that goes around woodworking communities that says if you use a CNC machine, you're not a woodworker. And I just don't think that's true. If you're really technically savvy and you want to get into some CNC work, go ahead and do it. There is nothing that says that CNC work is not woodworking. In my opinion, if you're working with wood, you're a woodworker. Let me show you a couple of projects that I created with the CNC machine, and you tell me whether or not that's woodworking. So here's a project that I created a number of years ago, and I used a CNC machine. If we look at these checker pieces here, you can see I created a crown on each piece to designate a king. You can also see that they're perfectly round, and that's what I use the CNC for. And if someone were to tell me by creating these checker pieces that it wasn't woodworking, I'd say they're crazy. Now let me show you another project that I created that I also used a CNC machine on. So here's another project that I created as a gift for family and friends a couple of Christmases ago. As you can see, it's engraved on the side and it says Merry Christmas from the Flynns. If we turn it around, there's a Christmas tree here as well. And I also cut this out with the CNC machine. So the moral of the story is, if you want to get into woodworking, there really is no limitation. If you do CNC work, or if you build decks, or if you do any home improvements, you're a woodworker. Especially, don't believe anyone that says CNC work is not woodworking. So that's 8 tips down and only 2 left to go. Now this next thing I want to talk about is something I had no idea about when I first started woodworking. And this can really bite you in the butt towards the tail end of your projects if you don't start to develop your skills in this early in your woodworking career. So every project you build has to be finished. And in my shop, in this corner over here, I've got all of my finishes. Let's take a trip to Home Depot and take a look at some of the finishes that are available. So picking a finish at a place like Home Depot can be very confusing. There's all sorts of options. There's items like Danish oil, there's wipe-on poly, there's actually spray cans of polyurethane and lacquer, and there's also cans of lacquer and polyurethane. So which do you pick? Well, that really is a personal preference. If we look at my finishes, you can see I have a variety of different types of finishes and ways you can apply these finishes. Let's take a closer look at some of my favorites and some that I recommend for beginning woodworkers. So first and foremost, you can't go wrong with things like spray lacquer and spray polyurethane. These are items that can easily be applied to your workpiece and they're very simple to use. Another great option are finishes that you can easily wipe onto your projects. Things like wipe-on poly, teak oil, or Danish oil are great solutions to easily apply that finish. Lastly, a finish that I really got into in beginning woodworking was things like this clear brushing lacquer. Now I recommend using a lacquer versus a polyurethane in beginning woodworking. Now let me tell you why that is. So one reason I really like lacquer versus polyurethane is you don't have to sand in between each coat. Using something like this brushing lacquer, you can apply one coat, let it dry, and then apply another coat. Versus if you're using a polyurethane, you have to sand in between each coat. So recommending using lacquer for the beginning woodworker really is a personal opinion of mine. It's how I started and it really is easy to apply. The only time you really need to sand it is right before you're putting your last coat of lacquer on, and that just smooths everything out. So whether using a brushing finish, a spray finish, or a wipe-on finish, just start to familiarize with how finishes work and how to use them. There's nothing more frustrating than to finish a project and not know how to finish that project. Well, that covers 9 tips for the beginning woodworker. Now that we've covered 9, let's take a look at our last item. And this has everything to do with shop safety, everybody's favorite subject. So shop safety is something that I think most beginning woodworkers don't even think about. I know I didn't when I first started. In fact, this is something that I still struggle with today. A lot of times when I move from one tool to another, I'll forget to put on my PPE. But even though I'm not perfect at it, I still want to talk about it. In my opinion, when you first start out, there's 7 items that are critical PPE and shop safety items that I think every beginning woodworker should know about. And it can be very confusing when you're just starting out, walking into a big box store and not knowing quite what you should get. So let's go over to Home Depot and I'll show you some of the items available. So one of the drawbacks that I found about going to a place like Home Depot is they really have limited PPE. They mostly focus on things like earplugs, face masks, respirators, as well as eye protection. However, there's a lot more protection that you need if you want to become a woodworker. So the first thing that I recommend that you get at a place like Home Depot is a mask. Now you can buy disposable ones like this, and this is an N95 mask. And this is great because it prevents all the particulates from your sawdust getting into your lungs. The second thing that I recommend that you get at a place like Home Depot is ear protection. Now a place like Home Depot typically only carries 2 types of ear protection, either over the ear protection or earplugs. The third item that you can get at Home Depot is eye protection. Now I purchased these glasses actually from Amazon.com, and the thing that I really like about these glasses is they have bifocals, and since I'm getting old, these really help. Now a lot of people may disagree with me, but in my opinion these vacuums are actually PPE, and this is my 4th recommendation. These vacuums collect a lot of the sawdust and keep all that sawdust out of our lungs. So that's 4 items you can typically find at a big box store that I think is critically important to workshop safety. The next 3 items are not always available at these stores, so let's go take a look at those. So the next item is something that I've never seen available at a big box store to be able to be purchased on its own, and that's a push stick. Now this is the push stick that came with my table saw. However, I recommend getting some aftermarket push sticks just to have laying around your table saw. By having a couple of extra push sticks, it makes it that much easier to grab one when you need it, and the last thing you want to do is to be looking for your push stick right in the middle of a cut. Along with the push stick is another safety tool that's just as important, and that is the push block. Now, I've never seen a push block available at these big box stores, and I'll leave a link to both this push stick and this push block so you can go check them out for yourself. The last safety accessory that I recommend for the beginning woodworker is a featherboard. Now, featherboards come in all different shapes and sizes, but I really like this hedgehog featherboard, so I'll leave a link for that as well. So by purchasing just a few items, you can make your workshop that much more safe. And by having a safe workshop, that ensures that you're going to be able to do this for a long time. Well, that's going to do us for today. If you're just starting out, hopefully this video is valuable to you. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, as it really does help out this small woodworking channel. Until next time, take care as always.